Billions spent, 7 years of construction, and barely anyone lives there. This isn't just another empty Chinese city. This is Xiong'an, a mega project personally championed by China's most powerful leader in decades. Wide, empty boulevards stretch for miles. Gleaming skyscrapers stand vacant. A smart city, built for millions, sits waiting for residents who never came. What went so catastrophically wrong with Xi Jinping's dream city? And what does this $93 billion failure tell us about the future of the world's second largest economy? April 1st, 2017. Chinese state media makes a surprise announcement. A new area of national significance would be built from scratch just 60 miles southwest of Beijing. This wasn't just another city. This was to be a showcase of Xi Jinping's vision for China's future. A high-tech, environmentally friendly urban hub that would relieve pressure on overcrowded Beijing and become a model for cities worldwide. The plan was massive in scale. 3 counties in Hebei province, one of China's poorest regions, would be transformed into a gleaming metropolis, eventually covering 770 square miles. That's nearly 3 times the size of New York City. This would be no ordinary development. Xiong'an would feature cutting-edge smart city technology, zero-emission transportation networks, and AI-powered urban management systems. World-class education and healthcare facilities would serve residents, while green spaces would cover 70% of the city. When the announcement hit, it triggered a property frenzy. Housing prices in nearby villages tripled overnight. Investors rushed to the area, desperate to cash in on what was being billed as the project of the millennium. The government responded swiftly, freezing all property transactions. This would be different from China's other building booms. Xiong'an would develop according to plan, Xi's plan. What made Xiong'an different from dozens of other new Chinese cities was simple. It carried Xi Jinping's personal stamp of approval. Since taking power in 2012, Xi had consolidated control to a degree not seen since Mao Zedong. He eliminated term limits, enshrined Xi Jinping thought into the constitution, and ruthlessly purged opponents. Xiong'an wasn't just about urban planning, it was about cementing Xi's legacy. Chinese media compared Xiong'an to Shenzhen, the fishing village transformed into a tech metropolis under Deng Xiaoping, and Pudong, Shanghai's financial district developed under Jiang Zemin. Every Chinese leader needs their defining project. Xiong'an would be Xi's. The political messaging was clear. If Shenzhen represented China's opening up in the 1980s, and Pudong showed China's economic rise in the 1990s, Xiong'an would showcase China's emergence as a technological and environmental superpower under Xi. Failure wasn't an option. Xiong'an had to succeed because Xi had personally staked his reputation on it. To understand Xiong'an, we need to understand China's broader economic landscape. By 2017, China's old growth model was showing serious cracks. For decades, China relied on a simple formula: build infrastructure, attract manufacturing, and export to the world. This approach lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty and transformed China into an economic powerhouse. But it also created massive problems. Ghost cities with no residents sprang up across the country. Local governments accumulated mountains of debt. Environmental degradation reached crisis levels. Real estate bubbles threatened economic stability. Xi promised a different economic model, focused on innovation, domestic consumption, and sustainability. Xiong'an would be the showcase for this new approach. The numbers were staggering. Initial investment was set at $580 billion over 20 years. The first phase alone would cost $93 billion. Major corporations were strong-armed into committing to the project. Over 100 state-owned enterprises pledged to open offices there. Tech giants like Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu promised to build R&D centers. On paper, it looked unstoppable. In reality, it was about to collide with harsh economic realities. Construction began at breakneck speed. Entire villages were demolished. Hundreds of thousands of farmers were relocated. Ancient orchards were bulldozed to make way for the future. By 2020, the basic infrastructure was taking shape. A high-speed rail station now connected to Beijing in just 20 minutes. A massive artificial lake and wetland restoration project transformed the landscape. Smart roads with sensors and charging stations for electric vehicles crisscrossed the area. Underground utility tunnels spanned hundreds of miles. 5G coverage blanketed the entire region. The first buildings were architectural marvels, sleek, sustainable, and packed with technology. Everything from traffic lights to trash cans was connected to a central brain that would optimize the city's operations. Construction companies worked around the clock. At its peak, over 200,000 workers were on site. Even COVID-19 barely slowed progress. The government poured in money as if cost was no object. The first $93 billion was spent by 2022, with little to show for it, except empty buildings and perfectly maintained streets with no cars. The physical city was rising from the dust, but something crucial was missing: people. Fast forward to today. What do we find in Xiong'an? Beautifully constructed buildings stand empty. Parks are immaculately maintained, but deserted. The high-speed rail station, designed to handle 100,000 passengers daily, sees just a trickle of visitors. Official statistics claim 100,000 people now live in Xiong'an, but satellite imagery and on-the-ground reports tell a different story. Nighttime light data, a reliable proxy for urban activity, shows minimal electricity usage. Cell phone location data indicates very few people actually stay overnight. Journalists who visit report surreal scenes: empty shopping malls with staff outnumbering customers 5-1, housing complexes with security guards but no residents, restaurants serving a handful of diners in spaces designed for hundreds. The promised corporate relocations haven't materialized. Most state-owned enterprises have opened token offices, small operations staffed by junior employees, while keeping their real operations in Beijing. Tech companies have similarly hedged their bets. Instead of moving entire divisions as promised, they've established small research outposts while keeping their talent pools in established tech hubs. 7 years and $93 billion later, Xiong'an remains largely a ghost city. But why? The failure of Xiong'an can't be blamed on a single factor. Instead, it represents a perfect storm of political, economic, and practical miscalculation. First, there's the location problem. Unlike Shenzhen, next to Hong Kong, or Pudong in Shanghai, Xiong'an lacks natural advantages. It's in a relatively poor area with no existing industrial base, university cluster, or unique geographic benefits. Second, economic timing couldn't have been worse. Xiong'an launched just as China's economy began slowing dramatically. The property market, which drove much of China's growth, started cooling. COVID-19 hit. The tech sector faced increased regulation. Companies that initially made grand promises to relocate found themselves struggling with more immediate concerns: survival in a challenging economic environment. Third, the human factor was ignored. Cities aren't just buildings and technology, they're complex social ecosystems that develop organically over time. Beijing's professionals were reluctant to move families hours away from established social networks, top schools, and career opportunities. Without a critical mass of residents, Xiong'an couldn't develop the amenities that make cities attractive. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Xiong'an suffered from the fundamental contradiction of modern China, a market economy directed by top-down political control. Cities like Shenzhen succeeded because they grew organically, responding to market forces. Xiong'an was imposed by political decree, with economic considerations secondary to political symbolism. Xiong'an's failure isn't just a local problem. It represents deeper issues with China's economic model and Xi's leadership approach. The ghost city exposes the limits of state-directed capitalism. You can build the infrastructure, but you can't force economic activity to follow. It reveals dangerous disconnections between China's leadership and economic reality. Xi surrounded himself with loyalists who tell him what he wants to hear, not what he needs to know. The failure also highlights China's deeper economic challenges. Returns on infrastructure investment continue to decline. Local governments struggle under massive debt loads. Productivity growth is falling. The property market faces serious oversupply issues. Demographic decline threatens long-term economic vitality. Most concerning for Xi, Xiong'an undermines his carefully cultivated image of infallibility. In a system where the leader cannot be criticized, projects associated with him cannot officially fail. This creates dangerous distortions. Resources continue flowing to failing projects. Problems go unaddressed because acknowledging them would mean admitting the leader made a mistake. The result? A growing gap between China's glossy propaganda and its economic reality. What happens next for Xi's ghost city? Officially, nothing has changed. Chinese media still describes Xiong'an as a resounding success. Construction continues. The investment keeps flowing. Realistically, there are 3 potential scenarios. First, the slow build. Given enough time and continued investment, Xiong'an might eventually attract population, perhaps not the millions originally envisioned, but enough to avoid complete failure. This would take decades, not years. Second, the quiet scale back. Without formally abandoning the project, authorities might gradually reduce ambitions and funding, letting Xiong'an develop at a more natural pace as a modest satellite of Beijing. Third, the stubborn push. Driven by political pride, the government might double down, forcing more aggressive relocations of government agencies and companies, regardless of economic logic. Early signs point to the third option. Recent directives have ordered accelerated relocations of Beijing municipal departments. Universities face pressure to establish Xiong'an campuses. State-owned enterprises report increasing pressure to move substantial operations. Forcing the issue creates new risks. Rushing relocations could damage Beijing's economy, without creating sustainable growth in Xiong'an could further undermine business confidence at a time when China desperately needs private sector vitality. Xiong'an stands today as a monument to ambition, unmoored from reality, beaming buildings without purpose, wide boulevards without traffic, smart city with no one to serve. More than that, warning sign for China's future. Leaders cannot be questioned. Economic reality takes a backseat to political symbolism. Massive projects proceed despite clear warning signs. Foundations for long-term prosperity erode. China faces its most challenging economic environment in decades. The empty streets of Xiong'an raise a disturbing question. We can't admit failure in a single city. Can China address the much larger challenges looming on the horizon? Other economic time bombs are ticking beneath the surface of the world's second-largest economy. What happens when they finally explode? Let us know what you think in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and watch our next one shown on screen. Thank you for watching.